So good morning to all of you here in church this morning and those watching online. It's hard to believe that we're already halfway through February and it's now only 3 Sundays before Lent starts. Today we'll be looking at the passage from Jeremiah that David read earlier and thinking about what that might reveal about our relationship with God and what he wants for us. How tapping into God's love for us will help us bear fruit and prosper. So let us take a moment to ask him to open our hearts so that we may hear his message in his word and understand what he wants from us in our lives. But first, I'd like to start by asking if any of you have been watching Sir David Attenborough's latest programme, The Green Planet. If any of you haven't, then I'd heartily recommend it to you. I've learned so much more about plants and trees that I didn't know before I started watching it. In the series, Sir David and his team have travelled all around the world to both well-known and quite obscure places to bring us some stunning photography and amazing insights. Though I'm sure you're now wondering why I'm referencing a BBC series in my talk with you this morning. Well, the reason is that I found a link from that series to the depiction of trees in the Jeremiah passage quite compelling, as The Green Planet includes a lot of footage about both roots and fruits of trees. But I'll come back to that later. At first glance, the passage from Jeremiah can be viewed as a typical Old Testament passage, full of curses and judgment. Exactly the type of passage that today we feel awkward reading. It does not bring us the comfort that many of the New Testament passages about Jesus do. It talks about blessings, but it makes no mention of our place in heaven, bought for us by Jesus' blood. Instead, it is unremitting in its commentary about how people that do wrong are cursed, will suffer and be judged. But I'd argue that such a first-glance reading of that passage misses many of the additional points that Jeremiah seeks to make, and also, in my opinion, misses the positive message of hope that the passage contains for us all. To unwrap the layers in this passage, we need to first think what Jeremiah was seeking to achieve and what was happening in the background at the time that he was writing. And he was writing in a time of great change for the people of Israel. We need to remind ourselves that they were just on the brink of being invaded, and that most of the people that survived the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar's forces would be taken into exile in Babylon and Egypt. His message was meant as a warning to the Israelites that God was angered by the way they were ignoring him, were not respecting his temple, and were worshipping other gods. We see this referenced in the first part of the passage, the section which talks about those who turn away from the Lord being cursed. And the passage follows a standard format that is used in many places in the Bible, using the sharp contrast between the curses and the blessings evoked in the text. If we go far enough back, then it is found in Deuteronomy chapter 27, when Moses and the elders list out the curses as a means of reinforcing the positive message of hope in the covenant of God with his people. After each section of that passage, which starts, "Cursed be the man who," the people are encouraged to say, "Amen." But this is swiftly followed in chapter 28 with a listing of blessings that will come to those who follow the Lord, and is summarised in an amazing passage which states, "The Lord will open his heavens, the storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season, and to bless all the work of your hands." Our Jeremiah passage contains the same shorthand way of explaining what will happen to those who follow the Lord and those who do not. The price of the covenant that God makes with his people is obedience to him, and in return he promises them abundance and good things. And it is because the message is written in a banner headline style that it makes it easier to digest. Perhaps because these messages were meant to be passed on verbally. I must admit that I can almost hear in my head the town crier ringing his bell and calling out those messages. Cursed are those who, blessed are those who. And it is only one step forward into the New Testament, where Jesus' Sermon on the Mount lists those who are blessed. And also we find a slightly different take on this in our Gospel reading today, as Luke writes out how Jesus lists the blessings coming to the disciples, those who follow him. But what should we make of the section in Jeremiah about the heart being devious and the Lord testing our minds and hearts? Surely we might consider that to be part Old Testament judgment against us. Again, it could be read that way, but I think it is deeper than that. It states that God will be watching and checking that our hearts and minds acknowledge him as Lord, and that we are not just paying him lip service. In other words, he wants to ensure that we are truly following him. And this is part of the covenant he has with us, his people. He does not abandon us, even though his love for us may lead him to check on us. He does this because he wants the best for us all. Looking at our passage in Jeremiah in more detail, we can see that there are two clear images presented. The former, which symbolises those who decide not to follow God and instead rely on their own efforts. The text calls this a shrub, and it is depicted as being planted in a desert region, in the parched places of the wilderness and in an uninhabited salt land. The image is of a hard and arid landscape where it is difficult to live. The shrub has not evolved into a tree. In sharp contrast is the image of those who put their trust in God, who shall be like a tree planted by water, sending its roots into the stream. It shall not fear when the heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. In this second image, we are shown a tree that survives by pulling on the water from the stream. And this water enables it to survive and thrive through all weather conditions. The image of the second thriving tree is also a direct link to Psalm 1, which was also set in the lectionary today. In that psalm, the psalmist likens those who follow the Lord as being like a tree planted by streams of water, bearing fruit in due season, with leaves that do not wither. Whatever they shall do, it shall prosper. I think the most interesting aspect of these verses is that there is no promise here of a magical land where only goodness and prosperity exist. Instead, the imagery of heat and drought indicates that those who follow God will be tested, that there will be times of hardship to be faced in our lives. But the positive message we can take from this is that if we place our trust in God, then he will sustain us and ensure that we prosper, whatever we may face in our lives. He will ensure that we are able to bear fruit and do well. And one thing that really struck me in last week's Green Planet episode was the opening sequence that was filmed in the Taklamakan Desert in China. The camera panned over ridge after ridge of wide-ranging sand dunes. It looked as though nothing could possibly survive in such an inhospitable environment. And then the camera focused on an individual tree, a Euphrates fig tree, which was surprising enough. But then the camera moved on to reveal a whole group of these trees. And Sir David explained that these trees, many of which are thousands of years old, tap into water deep underground. He then added that their roots are interconnected with the other trees in the group. And most surprising of all, they share the water that they find with other trees nearby. And this felt to me like a metaphor for our church community. We are all on our individual journeys of faith, believing in God and trusting in Him, and drawing on Him to support us through the difficult times in our lives. But at the same time, we bolster each other up and support each other when times are hard. So in the week ahead, let us focus our hearts and minds on God and His message of love for us all, knowing that He wants everything that we do to bear fruit. But at the same time, let us act in community with each other to support one another on our journeys of faith. We ask this in your name, Lord. Amen.
As we've been hinting, Lent is fastly approaching, so look out on this coming week's update, but also with things in church. We're going to be suggesting a couple of books and making those available for you to buy. There's going to be a short series of talks and a couple of Lent groups as well, so do keep an eye out for that.